Yo, I'm back for another video. So I'm gonna go ahead and launch this new show that I threatened to launch in my last video, the Arbitrary Interlude number 12. Sounds like a classical piece of music. I am going to call this the Bottomless Well, and that describes the huge amount of music from the past that continues to surface. There's constantly being new stuff unearthed and excavated and uploaded to YouTube, where we can share it and hear it and download. I decided that I mentioned some of this in that video, but if you didn't see the video or just forgot, I'm going to start theming these episodes out, as opposed to the way I was doing it in the On Musik thing, where I was doing just kind of random genres and random bands that I was discovering or rediscovering on YouTube. So what I'm doing now is kind of going through and finding ones that of the ones I'm discovering and classing them by genre and by era, and then I'm throwing into those some favorites of mine anyway, which are also generally available on YouTube to hear, favorites of my own that fit into those genres and those eras. Hope that made sense. I'm going to start going easy on myself because I'm trying to do a lot more research on some of these groups, the ones I'm not as familiar with, because I think I'm pretty good on the opinions and analysis and descriptions for the most part, but facts are important to me. I like sharing facts and information, so I'm going to try to load these up with more of that. So I'm going to kind of be researching these different groups in more detail beyond just the notes on YouTube. If they're there, they'll help, and then Wikipedia, and then Discogs website, and just general Googling, kind of going down the rabbit hole. And some of these groups are really obscure. They only did one or two albums, like 40, 50 years ago, and nobody knows who they are. But a lot of times they may have influenced somebody else, or they may have a member or two that ended up in a more well-known outfit. So I want to start with two of the big guns for me. And then I'm just going to talk about some of the ones I've got into more recently that fit in that same general milieu. I'm not going to do a ton. I've tried to, like most of the shows, I've tried to limit the featured artists to about 5 to 7 acts, and I'm going to try to do at least 5 this time around. We're going to see how time runs, but yeah, I'll do at least 5. But the big two I want to start out with are ones that kind of started me on this path a long time ago. Today's theme, I guess you could say, is going to be 1970s American proto-metal, heavy rock, psych rock, heavy psych, prog-ish, but not quite progressive rock. Some of it kind of proto-punk and garage sounding. Basically bands that are, in some way or another, they're playing, their sound, their guitars, their vocals, their lyrics, their mystique are heavy, and especially heavy for their day and ahead of their time. So there were a ton of these bands that began at the end of the 60s and proliferated in the 70s. And it is indeed a bottomless well, it seems like. So Not all these bands are great. I'm going to try to talk about the ones I like the most or that struck me as being the most interesting. I might mention some that I think are duds too. I'll still give you links to how to listen to them. And that's also part of my new format is I'm going to put links in the notes down here to all where I found all these, where you can find all these on YouTube, like full albums to listen to and form your own opinion because I can't really play you the music as we're going. It's just sound issues on my end and then copyright issues. It might get my videos taken down. So I'm going to let you do the legwork, but I'm going to kind of put you in the right direction and you'll either discover some gems and thank me for it or you'll hear some, trash and curse me for it. But it's okay. Either way, you're adding to your knowledge, and that's kind of what I'm about is just, I'm an autodidact and, knowledge. I'm a knowledge junkie, so to speak. And I want to become rich off all the useless ephemera that I'm storing up, but haven't quite figured out a way to do it yet. Who knows? Maybe these videos will, somehow get monetized and make me wealthy. You're right. So let me talk with a couple of, I'm just going to discuss these groups and as I encountered them and then my thoughts on them and what I think their best works are, most recommended works, which will be the ones I'll link up to. So the first big one is Dust. Dust, it started in 1969. This cat named Richie Wise, who was a singer, guitar player, and two younger kids, Kenny Aronson and Mark Bell. They were like a power trio. They had a producer and manager named Kenny Kerner, and he wrote the group's lyrics generally. They put out an album in 1971 on this small Kama Sutra label, and it is kind of a harbinger of what is to come with these guys. They didn't have a long career, but they made quite an impact in a lot of ways, which we'll get into. The first album it's just very early 70s, kind of little psychedelic, a little garagey or biker rock kind of sounding. Not particularly aggressive. I mean, at times, yes. But yeah, a lot of kind of rock, I don't want to say ballads, but, melodic blues rock, with fairly heavy guitars, very skillful rhythm section, especially for their age. But, even though it's in my library, I can't unequivocally recommend it except as a completist document because I don't think I didn't hear the first one for many years after the next album I'm going to talk about. And when I finally did, it was like, oh, wow, the first Dust album finally. And I was quite a bit disappointed. And each time I listened to it, I listened for things, maybe, nuances, valences I haven't heard before. And generally I come up kind of empty handed and like, this is pretty entertaining. It's fun. It'd be nice to throw a few of these songs in some kind of retro 70s movie. It'd be cool if they were in some of those movies, some biker movies or some exploitation films of that era, sexploitation films, kind of hippy dippy kind of stuff. Didn't happen though. But Dust though really exploded with the next album, which was called, really appropriately called, Hard Attack. And everything about this album kind of cemented their kind of eternal mystique among collectors and aficionados of kind of forgotten rock and proto-metal music. The album cover is a Frank Frazetta painting, which is also used on the cover of the trade paperback edition, Conan the Cimmerian, which I believe was the first of, I can't remember the publisher. I want to say Del Rey, possibly. It was one of those ubiquitous sci-fi horror action labels that put out mass market paperbacks. throughout the 60s and 70s. I used to always see them for a while. They did a whole series on Conan the Barbarian and collected, all of the extant Robert E. Howard original material, but kind of stitched it together with pastiche material by L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter. Lynn Carter being known for creating his own really cool barbarian character Thongor of Lost Lemuria, who had a great comic book adaptation by Steve Gerber and Vincent Alcazar. So Conan the Cimmerian was the first of that series. And of course, that idea of tying together all of the Howard material, which was written out of chronological order in Conan's life and incomplete and unfinished, tying that together, putting it in order, and fleshing it out with other pastiche works, that became the backbone of the Conan the Barbarian comic book, launched in 1970. I want to say 70 or 71 by Marvel, and 70, I guess, and by Roy Thomas and Barry Windsor Smith. And of course, that immediately became the kind of lightning rod for the popularity of the sword and sorcery subgenre. It was already around, and there was already obviously popular stuff at the time, like Lord of the Rings and the 60s Conan. Lancer paperbacks were popular, but the comic book brought it into the public consciousness. And if it weren't for the comic book, I don't think the books would have continued to sell the way they did, and vice versa, maybe. And certainly there would never have been a Conan the Barbarian film with Arnold Schwarzenegger, which, that wouldn't be much of a loss to me, because I think it was a very poor adaptation and very bad casting. And I'm in the minority there, but I have noticed most of the people who like Schwarzenegger as Conan aren't necessarily big fans of the comics or the original story. So they have their idea of Conan. It's just like Howard the Duck. They encountered the movie first, and that's their thing, and they're not going to go backward and to the source material. And if they do, it's not going to trump their nostalgia. I'm a little different, though. I've talked about this kind of thing before. Back to Dust. So Dust has this cool cover by Frazetta of Conan fighting these frost giants or whatever. Heart Attack. And, the thing about Heart Attack is that it's like a 39-minute album. It's pretty relentless. Just tumbling drums that are just incredibly just hard-hitting, and just incredible fills. We're going to get into the drummer later, because you'll know who he is once I talk more about him. But Kenny Aronson, the bass player, was very good. Richie Wise was just a monster. He played all the acoustic and electric guitars, and he did all the vocals. The very first song on the album is Pull Away / So Many Times. Pull Away / So Many Times, I first heard on a mixtape that a punk rock friend of mine made for me in 1980. He was mainly into hardcore punk, but he did like Sabbath and Thin Lizzy and some Rainbow, and some of this kind of stuff, kind of lost hard rock that was a little kind of, rawer, looser proto-punk, and it kind of spurred my love for that kind of material, and especially this band, and particularly that track. I never get sick of this song. It's just, it's incredible. The rest of the album is incredible. Walk in the Soft Rain, Alone, Learning to Die, which was written by Kenny Aronson, the only one on the album he wrote. Suicide is heavy as hell. Before there was a great Thin Lizzy song called Suicide. There's that kind of melodious hippie folk kind of element that was in the first album. But there's just it's just fiercer, more urgent. The vocals are clearer, more dominant, more passionate. And I'm going to recommend a link for, there's not a copy of just the Heart Attack album by itself. There's some playlists that encompass it. which you're welcome to search that out. You'll be able to find Dust, Heart Attack, and you'll find the playlist with all the songs. But then, you know, you'll have to listen to them in the playlist order, proper playlist order to get the album experience. But I'm going to make it easier for you. Someone posted a long file, which is the entire first Dust album called Dust, and the entire second album called Heart Attack. Hard Attack. Get it? Heart Attack, Heart Attack. And you can just hear the whole Dust oov, and that was it. That was their discography. But I'm also going to put a link to a recent cover that I just stumbled on only days ago of Pull Away / So Many Times, done by the contemporary occult rock female-fronted band Lucifer. And it's a hell of a version. And there is going to be episodes ahead where I'm going to talk about occult rock and modern occult rock mainly. The older examples, the paradigms of occult rock, which is kind of stylistically, sonically similar to the kind of things I'm describing from that era, but the lyrics are tinged differently. And there is a preeminent band that influenced the way occult rock shaped up nowadays, because there's a whole revival that started, I guess, maybe in the late 90s, early 2000s, and is going very strong. And they're mainly female-led bands with very kind of retro heavy sound, along with you know, occult and supernatural and satanic lyrics. And I'll get to that band in a minute. I wanted to do Dust because I encountered Dust first, but I can't give Dust the headlining slot on this episode. Before I wrap up on Dust, when they kind of dissolved, Richie Wise kind of, I don't want to say disappeared, but he kind of faded, you know, away. I don't know what happened. However, the rhythm section had very illustrious careers. Kenny Aronson had a band called Stories, and then he became a session player. He played for Edgar Winter, played for Joan Jett, Bob Dylan, Billy Idol, Billy Squier, Foghat. One band that he was in that I particularly have a soft spot for was called HSAS, which stands for Hagar, Schoen, Aronson, and Shreve. And this was a one-off album in the mid-'80s with Sammy Hagar on vocals, Neil Schoen on guitar, Kenny Aronson on bass, Michael Shreve on drums. And these guys kind of had, you know, different connections through different band lineups over the years. So they formed this kind of super group, and they did a really good album, and they did a really interesting, they included on a live rendition of A Whiter Shade of Pale, with Sean playing the organ lines on electric guitar, and you know, some great stuff. I mean, you know, a lot of people forget that Sammy Hagar came out of a semi-respectable hard rock background with Montrose, and also Neil Schoen began with Journey, the original Journey, with Ross Valory on bass and Prairie Prince and later Ainsley Dunbar on drums when they were a prog rock band. And they did 2 albums as prog rock, and they were pretty good. Totally different than the Steve Perry, you know, Moon-Eyed Love Song kind of AOR thing that everyone knows them for. Michael Shreve was the very young drummer for Santana that kind of became famous for his solo on Woodstock. So anyway, it was a super group that I particularly liked. So Aronson ended up in that. Same guy from Dust. And he played with a ton of other people. You know, we could go on and on and on. He even joined a reincarnation of the New York Dolls in recent times. Let's talk about Mark Bell, the drummer. Mark Bell, the drummer, is a guy that I actually met in person because his band at the time, this was the early 90s, maybe 1991, was playing here in Charlotte, and he and the guitar player were thumbing through record albums, and this was a place called Record Exchange, where me and my then best buddy were always picking up used vinyl really cheap, tons at a time. And I was flipping through Jethro Tull, and Mr. Mark Bell looked over my shoulder. He's like, "That's a good one, man." And I don't remember which album he really liked it. I don't know. I can't. I can see the album cover, but anyway, so much for that story. But at that time, Mark Bell had a different name, the name he's been professionally known as for some decades, which is Marky Ramone. He was in the Ramones. He replaced the original drummer, I believe his name was Tommy Ramone, and was their drummer all the way through the end of their career. But between Dust and the Ramones, what his evolution from this kind of proto-punk, hard attack band Dust and the Ramones, where he kind of became one of the gang. He joined Richard Hell and the Voidoids, and he's on their first album, The Blank Generation. And this is kind of a landmark New York punk album. He also had a band called Estes right after Dust, which I did finally find their album today. So I'm going to download it. I'm going to listen to it, and, I hope it's good. But anyway, yeah, he ended up being in the Ramones for quite a number of years, 1978 onward, and, was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with the Ramones. And then he did other punk projects like the Remains and Teenage Head, and he was even the drummer for the Reformed Misfits for a while. So he's an amazing drummer, just a powerhouse. So Dust has a lasting legacy. I think Heart Attack is, to me, one of the most emblematic albums of that era for this kind of stuff we're talking about. So let me move on to kind of my headlining band, and the one that really I have the most passion for of this batch, and which I'll probably mention in future installments. I'm bringing a few things up to look at as I do this. I've taken a lot more notes. I'm trying not to wing it and make too many mistakes, but I'm also trying not to crib too much on Windows, but I'm doing a little. But I've got some notes here that I actually wrote, and so let me go ahead and talk about Coven. Coven was formed in 1968 by Jinx Dawson. That's her real name. Jinx Dawson was a high school student. She was barely 18 and heavily interested in the occult and the supernatural. And, this is 68, so we're talking an era where the Church of Satan was in the news, and this kind of stuff was coming. The New Age era was rising to the fore, mysticism and magic and Kenneth Anger and this whole kind of, the left-hand path. This was stuff was becoming, I don't want to say mainstream, but it was seeping up into the mainline consciousness, which it later kind of sank again by the late 70s. But that was an exciting time. And I don't know, it was before my time, but for people who, including Jinx herself, have told me it was an exciting time. So she began writing these songs based around, her being a witch and her being an occultist. And, basically, there was nothing like this. They put out the album called, I always get the order of this album wrong, but Witchcraft Destroys Minds and Reaps Souls, 1969. So they had been touring. Actually, something I'm reading here says 1967 they started, so I guess it might have been late 67. So she wasn't quite 18. She was born in January 1950. So wow, 17-year-old female occultist. Great singer. She had a powerful voice, a beautiful woman with long blonde hair. Very, but a very dark kind of Queen of Darkness persona, way before goth. Basically, her and a guy named Oz Osborne. Yes, that's his name, Oz Osborne, isn't it? Greg Osborne. So they nicknamed him Oz. They formed the group late 67. And then early 68, they hooked up with Steve Ross, their drummers. Those three were kind of the axis that the group kind of spun around. They're the three that are on the famous cover of Witchcraft Destroys Minds and Reaps Souls. But they toured with a lot of groups. The original Alice Cooper band, Jimmy Page's Yardbirds, Vanilla Fudge. They were a powerful opening band. They were completely underground. Their subject matter really kind of, and their stage shows with, the crosses and the costume, her elaborate kind of witchy costumes, which really weren't maybe as unusual in the late 60s, but she was kind of like a dark hippie, and the Devil's Horns. She was the first musician to utilize that on stage. That's a fact. Many others have, given Ronnie Dio, bless his heart. I don't mean that in the Southern way. I really mean that. Rest in peace, Ronnie. He was given credit, but I don't think he ever really took it. He did get it from a similar symbol, the Devil's Horns, from his Italian grandmother. He first saw her doing it in the 50s. But he didn't use it in rock and roll until he was in Black Sabbath. Some years before that, Jinx began it, and that was also at least 5 years before Gene Simmons began doing it on stage. Geezer Butler has claimed that he did it a few times even before Dio was in the band, but it was still not before Jinx. So Coven, with various guitar players and a guy who finally became their mainstay keyboardist, Rick Durrett, piano and keyboardist, great musician. They created this album, and you've got like one side and part of the side two that are just these very short, interesting songs, all about Satanism and witches and etc. And the very first song on the album, it's called Black Sabbath. Now, I want you to realize that the Black Sabbath album, Black Sabbath, was recorded in November of 1969. I don't believe the song was written any earlier than mid-1969. Their album came out in early 1969. So, were Black Sabbath influenced by Black Sabbath? Well, first of all, they did not name their group after the song. I'm fairly certain of that. I've done tons of research on this and done the he said, she said. And there are partisans in these camps, and I feel bad about it because I love Coven. Jinx is a friend of mine, not like a buddy, a close buddy, but we have corresponded extensively over the years, and she's a wonderful person, and all respect to her innovations. She founded occult rock, that whole subgenre, and the Devil's Horns, and is part of stage performance in a rock band. But she didn't coin the term Black Sabbath. A Black Sabbath would be like a black mass. But of course, in 1963, Mario Bava, one of my favorite directors, did the Three Faces of Fear, which in America was called, and some English-speaking markets was called Black Sabbath. Sometime in the 1960s, Geezer Butler, some stories say with Tony Iommi, but some stories say before he met Tony Iommi, attended a showing of Black Sabbath in Britain, Boris Karloff being the star, and him having grown up on Boris Karloff. And Geezer was quite a wordsmith and lyricist himself. He was taken with the name, and when it came time for the band Earth to maybe have a more interesting name, he said Black Sabbath. That was, depending on who you talk to, that was either late 1968 or early 1969. So I believe the Geezer named the band after the movie. I don't know that Coven named their song after the movie. They were probably aware of the movie, had heard of it. But, I'm sure they were coming at it from this is a Black Sabbath. And so there's a purity to the source that's a lot more bound up in black magic than in Black Sabbath's source. Now, Black Sabbath's first album, which came out in early 1970, was called Black Sabbath, and their leading track was also called Black Sabbath. And the lyrics apparently were written, depending on who you talk to, by Ozzy and or Geezer. And, it's about a big black shape, and they never really say what it is, but they do imply it's Satan. It has a different tone. It has a doomier sound than Coven's song, but they're pretty unrelated. Coven's song is a little more fast paced, a little, I don't want to almost say funkier, kind of. It does have kind of an ominous, bent to it, and of course the lyrics are, all about witches flying through the air. I think there's a video that someone made of witches flying through the air, and some animated parts, like some parts from Benjamin Christensen's Haksan or Witchcraft Through the Ages, which I've reviewed on my channel here. So once you kind of untangle yourself from that, there was also another occult rock group prior to the debut of the first Black Sabbath album called Black Widow, and they were actually practicing Satanists, and they had some extensive stage shows. And I do believe some of their stage antics did influence Black Sabbath. Their music was at times a little scarier and harder edge than Coven, but still not the doom sound that Iommi Butler really almost created. Surely there were antecedents to that sound. There were bands, like Blue Cheer and Iron Butterfly, but Sabbath really kind of created that doom sound. That doomy sound has just become totally imitated worldwide since then. I've talked a lot about Black Sabbath, my favorite band, on a bunch of videos, and I had very little interest really so far from people. And I'm hoping these music videos will prove, they seem to be proving of more interest to people. So I'm not going to go on and on about that, but it is a contentious point at times with fans of one or both bands, and with Jinx Dawson herself, it has been at times. And I'm trying to present the information as accurately as possible based on the accounts that I've sifted through over the last 30 years. So that first album is really incredible, and like I said, has these great songs. And then most of side 2 is Satanic Mass, a 13-minute track, which is it was written by their producer Bill Trout, and of Dunwich Productions, Dunwich as in Lovecraft, and Jinx Dawson has been a lifelong H.P. Lovecraft aficionado as well, and I'll get into that in a minute too. So this was supposedly the first Black Mass ever recorded, audio, and first time Latin phrases like Ave Satanas, Hail Satan, were used in occult rock music, and of course, it's the first occult rock album. This influenced countless bands all the way through the years, that mentioned Satan in any way possible, and of course, ultimately led to genres like black metal, which I'm quite a fan of in several of its forms and offshoots. There's a direct line from, say, Coven to the band Mayhem, for instance. So can't really overestimate the influence of Coven. So there was kind of alluring photos of Jinx as a nude altar, as Anton LaVey described some of his Scarlet Women as occupying in a ritual in his books, and they're displaying the devil's horns and the band members, and it's an infamous poster. Supposedly they're doing the Black Mass during the photography. They may have been just a staged thing for drama. Either way, it's incredible. So there was a lot of controversy about Coven, and their career suffered. They insisted on sticking to their guns, so to speak, and their album was withdrawn from circulation around 1970. Sometime after this, they recorded another album around this time called simply Coven. And um, that album later added as one of its tracks their only hit single, 110 Soldier, which was not written by Jinx or Coven. I've actually forgot who written it. Dennis Lambert and Brian Potter. Okay, and it had been recorded previously. I don't think I've heard the original. Um, but Coven's version, it hit the charts high, especially in Australia of all places, and it was very well known. Billy Jack was a big exploitation movie of the time. It was kind of a different kind of exploitation movie, um, and cashed in on the socially conscious, anti-establishment thing, and the Native American hippie and the martial arts crazes. So, Jinx is credited on the album as sung by Coven. According to Jinx herself, she recorded it with session musicians. But since she essentially is Coven, it was Coven. So it ended up on their self-titled album, and then we get to 1974. They're on Buddha Records, which had a few interesting acts. And this album is the one I want to talk about and recommend. Blood on the Snow. So Blood on the Snow, I acquired for $1 in condition, not horrible, a little scratchy, a little beat up, but still respectable for my collection. I was collecting vinyl like mad then, and a place called Milestone Records that I used to hang out at, which really kind of is where my writing career kind of fermented, because it was where the alternative free paper Indie File, which ran for a number of years here and was distributed through the South, was conceived. And I was one of the very first writers. And then I didn't really do anything else seriously for about 3 more years. And then I became a regular writer for 3 years, almost until its end. My friend Samir Shukla ran Milestone Records, and he created Indie File. So he first published me, and I owe him for that eternally. Coven, I just had to buy it. I was like, yeah, I'd been wanting to hear the occult rock music after being into Sabbath so long, and similar kinds of things. I wanted to hear Black Widow. I wanted to hear Lucifer, which we're going to do a whole show on Lucifer because there's been a bunch of bands named Lucifer. I don't mean the one I mentioned earlier either. That's the modern version. This was an electronic one-off by Mort Garson, who called himself Lucifer, called Black Mass. It was all electronic album, and I bought it and Coven Blood on the Snow the same day for $1 each. That was a score. So I have been in love with Blood on the Snow ever since. I know all the songs inside out, backward and forward. It has my 2 favorite Coven songs on it. Blue Blue Ships and Lady O. Lady O is one of my favorite songs ever, easily in my top 10 of all most loved songs. And I did a video years later after I had met online Jinx on MySpace. I had just gotten on Facebook, but I got on YouTube, and it's on this channel as well. You can find it. It's called Lady O for Jinx, and I made a collage, with editing to Lady O and all kinds of different pictures of Jinx, everything I could find. And she said even a few of those she had never seen before at the time, and she added it to her official channel. That made me feel good. It's by far the video of mine that's been seen the most times. I think like 60 or 70,000 times, or whatever. But that's because of Coven, not me. But I'm just like the messenger. But it was definitely a love letter to her as a friend, and to her music, and the emotional effect that song had on me over the years. By the time that album came out, their music it had a lot of heavy rock inflections to it, which were also to be found on the album Coven, the second album. But it also had like a lot of melodic stuff, including Blue Blue Ships, which is this kind of mournful supernatural you know, love song from beyond the grave kind of vibe, and really the most mysterious, supernatural sounding song on the album. The lyrics had kind of deviated generally away from that. There's no overtly satanic or left hand path magic material on Blood on the Snow. The song Blood on the Snow is kind of evocative. The cover did have a painting of Satan playing the violin, and I can't remember that painting, I believe, was in existence before that album, though it could have been commissioned for that album. But I want to say it was, or it was based on an older piece of art. That's the front cover of the devil playing the violin, and he has a weird his face. He looks kind of like a dog, and he's got the horns and the tail and an anthropomorphic body. But there's a continuation of the painting on the back cover of this old man, and he's dreaming, and there's the band members painted. And that's a big gatefold, and inside there's all these incredible photos of the band, and the photos of Jinx are iconic, really. You know, blood dripping down her mouth, and her and the band, their heads around a drum with blood on it, and uh, there's just it's amazing. I mean, this stuff is yeah, it's true. It's been iconic to me for a long time, and it's really been gratifying to see another generation embracing. Not just I was the second generation to embrace Coven, but to see the millennial generation embracing Coven is awesome. And you know the way that happened was Jinx had to retire from music for a number of years to be a caregiver for her late father. And after he passed, she got into social media and renewed interest in her work. And first on MySpace, and then in a big way on Facebook. And she's still a big presence on Facebook. And she got a hold of the masters for those 3 albums to re-release on CD. She did a out of the vaults thing called Metal Goth Queen, which was kind of odds and ends of Coven from the late 70s and early 80s. By that time, the lineup had changed a lot, and it was still mainly Jinx, the presence on all of them. Some of that music was a little more pop and a little more new wave, some hard rock. Still, she's a really good songwriter, very great melodies. Um, and then they finally, did a studio album and announced they were going to tour. And now she had not toured for almost 30 years, maybe not that long. As Coven, I don't think she had toured properly since the mid to late 70s. So we're talking now around the early 2010s. She's planning to tour, and man, has she toured. She's toured the whole fucking world between this tour. The first one kicked off in 2017, and up until the COVID thing knocked all of our reality askew. She was playing shows all over the world, so about 3 years. And just as energetic as her age at her age as ever. And really, I mean, she looks and acts. She has to have imbibed quite a lot of virgin blood, because she's definitely an ageless, seemingly ageless beauty. She's a very quick-witted person, a very funny person, believe it or not, and very intelligent and sharp. And she has a lot of great stories about her life in rock and roll, and her life in the occult. Hopefully she'll do a great autobiography. I think she said she was working on one at one time. I can't recall for sure. But Jinx, on the album, she called it Jinx, and I reviewed it on CD for my ex-wife's now defunct website. And Jinx actually corrected me on a few facts for it via text, and I incorporated them. I gave it a really good review. It's a lot more heavy. It's more contemporary metal, a little kind of black metal, doom metal, death metal kind of influence. Different styles. Definitely more metal than anything else. Kind of keeping up with the times, so to speak, because she influenced those bands. So why not? But anyway, she needed to tour, and the album has some new musicians. people had been jamming with and bands that were influenced by her. But it also did have Rick Durrett on keyboards at times and Steve Ross on drums, Oz Osbourne on bass. And to get back to that real quick, Oz Osbourne and Ozzy Osbourne, that's a coincidence, really. I mean, Oz Osbourne, Greg Osbourne, I believe, began calling, his nickname was Oz probably around 66, 67. You know, supposedly Ozzy's nickname, John Michael Osbourne's nickname was Ozzy in school, but I don't, they didn't know each other or were aware of each other. It's kind of a common thing. You get two guys who are kind of into rock music and weird shit in the late 60s, and one's calling himself Oz after his name Osbourne, of course, Oz being the books and the land of Oz. And the other one, his classmates nicknamed him Ozzy. But Ozzy, of course, Ozzy Osbourne became, iconic, and Oz Osbourne is kind of to most people like a footnote in rock. But he was important to Coven's development for sure. The only musician from the old lineup that was committing to the tour was Rick Durrett, who I also friended on Facebook. Very cool guy. And some of the players on the Jinx album, and then some she'd newly recruited. They were going to play the Roadburn Festival in the Netherlands in April 2017. And Rick Durrett had to pull out at the last minute, I believe. So she put this band on the road, and this is the group that I saw on August 20th, 2017. I saw Coven's first American show on that tour, and their first American show in years, and it was at the Necronomicon in Providence, Rhode Island, of course, on H.P. Lovecraft's birthday, and it's one of the greatest shows I've ever went to. She played most of the first out. She played all of the first album except the Satanic Mass. A couple of tracks off the second album, Blood on the Snow, off Blood on the Snow. Unfortunately, no others off Blood on the Snow. And a few songs from Jinx, the most current album. And I was blown away. I didn't get to meet her. It was hot and it was packed, and I didn't want to bum rush her, but we chatted online afterwards about it, and it was just amazing. I went by myself actually, because I'd gone to Necronomicon with a good friend, and he wanted to drive back though to see the lunar eclipse, so I kind of had to take a bus back by myself, and I lost my phone on the bus, which those were my pictures that I'd taken of Coven and a little video were gone. But anyway, that was one of the great days of my life. One of the great, my top five favorite live concerts. And so Blood on the Snow, I strongly recommend, and I'll put a link on that. So I'm going to try to keep this at an hour if possible. I'm just going to kind of breeze through these next few. These are some ones that I've kind of had on the radar, and I made a list, like a playlist of ones that I'm probably going to be covering, and I'd been making it a point to try to listen to them as thoroughly as possible by the time the show started. So American 70s heavy rock, psych rock, this kind of general vein. I have a kind of a strange little list here. The one that I thought was a little interesting was called Shotgun Limited. That's the name of the band. Just turned it on, it's too loud there. But anyway, Shotgun Limited. Let me get this full thing up here. Not getting here we go. 1971 American group, and I got this off a channel that I have found quite a few of these kind of groups on recently, called the Gladiator of Rock. Shotgun Limited is their stuff is very raw garage rock, garage metal. Their first song has like a guitar organ riff that's very deep purplish. They're really rough vocals, kind of gritty, kind of almost like boogie woogie kind of stuff like the first Elf albums have. Some blues, but a lot of just ragged rock. Just some really good riffs. The sound is, you know, it's pretty slackly produced. Obviously, probably completely self-made, not distributed through some big label. And I don't know if they ever made another album. I've been having trouble finding the names of the band members. Uh, but they have the singer has a great voice, and they have some really memorable arrangements. They don't just play like straight out hard rock through the whole album. Um, they have a lot of dynamics. They have some kind of psychedelic kind of atmospheric stuff and some acid rock stylings in there. Um, really, just a nice, interesting album that's very much of its time, 1971. I mean, again, it's an album that would definitely feel at home on a really cheap biker movie soundtrack, and that's a compliment. Um, it's just it has that. I was gonna say grungy, but yeah, I mean grungy as I used it before there was that subgenre grunge. But just that kind of gritty, dirty, uh, fuzzy sound um, of the guitars and bass, um, and just really like a lot of music of that time. It really they played each song in whatever vein or genre or subgenre they felt like it, commercial or not. And it was guys and gals, not against this band, but like in Coven, people who were playing because they loved to play and they were stretching rock as far as it could go. I mean, they were experimenting with, ideas from other people who'd been experimenting, and um, it's fascinating. Such a such a groovy era. Um, so next on that kind of tip, uh, while we're still in America here, there is one called. This is a weird band. It's called It's All Meat. 1970. The album called It's All Meat. It's all meat, like all existence, all people, all food. Uh, Another down and dirty garage sounding band, but then they start going in. The first song is very like proto punk, almost like Iggy and the Stooges, and then they start going into some long, like slow passages that are almost like ambient. It's just vocal dominated stuff. Uh, some psych kind of stuff, some 60s sounding stuff. I don't know. A lot of it's self indulgent, and some of it's I don't want to say silly, but kind of whimsical. Uh, a lot of cliches of that era of music, but again, kind of an interesting listen because you really never know from track to track what the fuck you're going to get. There's like some church organs, and then there's some monstrous riffs, and then we're into some kind of sing-song Beatles-ish kind of passages. So I'll link that down here. It's all meat. I can't guarantee you'll love it, but you'll definitely. I don't know if you'll remember it or not, but while you're listening to it, it will yeah, it'll be distinctive. So I'm gonna wrap up with the American stuff with quite a find I thought as far as the Proto-Metal stuff. 1970 album called San Francisco's Shiver, and the band is called, you guessed it, Shiver. Um, it's a power trio, and man, they are heavy as fuck. And they've got the distortion cranked up, they've got the wah wah pedal completely on overdrive, and they're just jamming. I mean, there's song structures, but I mean, they're just endlessly jamming, the three guys. Uh, a lot of that energy with the kind of rumbling drums and the just kind of chaotic guitars. It reminds me some of the Dust album, Heart Attack, though not as tight, not as well produced, but not quite as creative compositionally. But sonically, it's out there. This album's like a sledgehammer to your brain. And I don't know the guitarist's name, but he's a monster, and the drummer's pretty much a monster too. But so you just want to hear bands jamming in that vein. Again, this stuff that would be an incredible an ambient kind of soundtrack to a some kind of underground film from that era. I don't know. It's Shiver. They're just crazy. They just love playing. And again, that's a common quality in these groups, and I think something that I really like, particularly, a great deal about them, is there's that anything goes, total freedom. These guys, most of these bands, I don't know if they thought they'd get big or if they cared. They might have been too, blissed out of their mind to worry about it. Uh, be interesting for someone to compile a book on tons of these kind of bands, who they were and the lifestyles they lived. So here we go. So Dust, Coven. I'm going to put Coven as the headlining when I do the title, but Dust, Heart Attack, Coven, Blood on the Snow. A link to the current band Lucifer's cover of a Dust period, of a Dust piece that I love. And I guess from there, who did I go into? Shotgun Limited, It's All Meat, and Shiver. I mean, there's a ton of these. Like I said, it is a bottomless well, and I'm really enjoying exploring it and plumbing its depths, its endless depths. So give me some feedback. Give me a thumbs up. Please share with all your music maniacal friends, and uh, subscribe. I'm going to be on this journey for a while longer. I think this is kind of my niche I'm doing with the music videos now. And I have tons of shows worth of material sketched out. Lots of great listening ahead for me and hopefully for you guys too when you follow my links. So yeah, the bottomless well, we're here, baby. So enjoy and take care. And of course, rock on.